Yeah, good day. You're welcome to Mktg 305, Consumer Behavior. Today our focus is on section 12. We'll look at the cultural influences on consumer behavior. I'm Dr. Prince Kodia. There are several factors that influence consumer behavior. One important factor in terms of consumption decision making is culture. So our focus will be on culture as an influence on purchase-related decision-making. We'll look at the definition of culture. We'll look at culture in relation to consumer needs, elements of culture, and how culture is learned in terms of values. And we also need to know that culture is a continuous evolution. And like we always do, we'll look at the implication for marketing strategy. You may read a chapter on cultural influences on consumer behavior where it becomes important. I will refer you to relevant materials via Sakai. What is culture? We can say that culture is vague and abstract, and therefore you expect that there will be several definitions by scholars. Culture is complex an interrelated set of elements comprising knowledge, belief, values, arts, laws, manners, morals, and what have you. In essence, culture permeates all aspects of the life of a group of people. And this is important to us because it influences how a group as a segment respond to marketing stimulus. Several advertising and promotional messages are designed to reflect the cultural values of the selected target audience. Culture, we say, is learned and sometimes reinforced or usually reinforced by our biological foundations. One's culture has a way of influencing the needs that are activated and how these needs get satisfied. Therefore, culture has the power or the influence in terms of providing direction and guidance for solving consumption-related problems. It shows the methods for satisfying, say, one's psychological, one's social or personal needs. There are several ways that culture will determine consumer needs. Culture may determine our choice of clothing or the type of clothes we wear and at what time. Culture will influence or determine what we need to wear in the house, what we need to wear to workplace, to church, or for dinner. Culture will also determine whether a given product is considered a necessity or discretionary luxury. So culture is that important. It influences all aspects of the life of a group of people. We need to mention the fact that some years ago, mobile phone, for instance, was considered luxury, and only a handful of people could afford it. But what do we see today? The culture of it being considered a luxury has changed a bit and is increasingly becoming more of a necessity. In this regard, when a particular standard no longer satisfies members of a given society or reflects their needs, it is either modified or discarded. That's why we are saying the culture is a bit dynamic. It evolves. In terms of culture, we can generally look at culture in terms of three different levels. We can talk of the supranational level, national level, and the group level. The supranational national level reflects the underlying dimensions of culture that affects multiple society. That is why we can talk about the African culture. I mean, a very broad group of people may have some similarities in the way they do certain things or certain manners that they exhibit. So in that broad sense, we can talk of supranational level culture. It's only important to us if it will influence consumption-related decision-making. We can also talk of a national level where, based on certain factors, we can talk of, say, the Ghanaian culture, the American culture, and so on and so forth, in relation to particular behavior. We can also talk of various groups. When we say groups, we can talk of occupational groupings, religious groupings. We can talk of groupings even in terms of demographics and all that. Why this is important to marketers is because of homogeneity in terms of tastes and preferences, in terms of attitude, motivations, opinions, and so on and so forth. And therefore, useful basis for market segmentation, targeting, and positioning. In terms of culture, we can look at culture, in trying to identify culture. Usually we may look at language, we may look at institutions, we may look at material productions, and also symbolic productions. I mean, all these factors, you realize that tend to vary from one group to the other, and therefore will be useful in terms of deployment of marketing mix elements. They are explained below. Culture, we say, is learned either from within our own society, or we are also influenced by the culture from other countries. That's why we can talk of enculturation and acculturation, which shows whether the culture is learned within or is as a result of the influence of other cultures. We can also talk of different forms through which the cultural values of a group of people could be learned. It could be acquired, or it could be learned by way of formal learning, informal learning, or technical learning as we go to school to acquire specific knowledge and so on. So these are ways by which individual consumers may acquire certain attitudes, value, tastes, and preferences in relation to decision making. The term enculturation simply refers to learning one's own culture, and acculturation simply has to do with learning foreign cultures. Acculturation is particularly important when marketers are considering international markets. Therefore, marketers need to be able to adapt to factors within those markets if they are to be effective. It's important that marketers remain in a continuous state of flux because culture is dynamic, and therefore tastes and preferences will continue to change. In today's competitive marketplace, marketers need to continuously monitor trends in culture or changes that are taking place and modify their marketing mix elements appropriately. Marketing mix elements in terms of product decisions, in terms of pricing decisions, in terms of promotional decisions, in terms of place decision, process decisions, issues that has to do with fiscal evidence, and the people element. Because of the evolution of culture changes. And these days, the media proliferation has made it that the world is increasingly becoming a global village when it comes to certain aspects of culture. And marketers need to be aware of this in relation to strategy. We can measure culture by three main means. We can do what we call content analysis, we can do consumer field observation, or what we call and the third one, value measurement instrument can also be used. Content analysis, for instance, focuses on the content of society's verbal, written, and other pictorial communications, including promotional messages. It can help us identify consumer intentions, focus, or communication trends of individuals or groups. It will help us describe attitudinal and behavioral responses to communication, It's also useful because it will help one to determine the psychological or emotional state of persons in a given market. It's also useful because it will help us determine social and cultural changes that have occurred in a given time space. We can also do field observation. This is a situation where one observes the activities of a group of people, sometimes without they knowing that they are being observed. This is also a very useful way of understanding and measuring culture. And then we can also have the value measurement approach. Typically, anthropologists have observed behavior of members of specific societies and are able to make some inferences in terms of the underlying values of the society from the behaviors that they observe. Self-administered questionnaires may also be used, and it will be useful in terms of helping to measure individuals' cultural values. Examples of these self-administered questionnaires are given below. Now, what are the implications of culture to marketers? Marketers need to know the culture of the target market, especially when entering foreign or international markets. Marketers also need to ensure that, for instance, the shape, color, symbols, and what have you, or the product decisions do not appear offensive to their target audience. Of course, different cultures interpret different symbols and other attributes differently, and marketers need to be aware of this. Because individuals learn culture from their families, peers, etc., it's important for us to iterate the importance of using reference groups as means of gaining more customers. So because of self-reference criteria, marketers need to understand the culture of their target market because of what we call the self-reference criteria, if their marketing efforts are to be successful. We know that in some jurisdictions, short clothing are allowed and therefore can be depicted in advertising. In other places, it will be very offensive. So marketers need to be mindful of cultural expectations in terms of norms, values, and this should permeate their marketing effort in terms of the 7 Ps and also how they integrate their marketing communication. These are your references. Thank you.